The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building a world where mainstream finance happens on-chain. Their first product, Phoenix, is a fully on-chain limit order book DEX on Solana doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. I know this team personally. It's one of the strongest in the space. If you're interested in working with a team that's here to stay, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers passionate about DeFi to join their team. You can find Ellipsis Labs on Twitter at ellipsis_labs or head to ellipsislabs.xyz to learn more and apply. All right, today we're here with none other than Udi. It's also my first live recording ever, so this will be exciting.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you are the first person I've ever interviewed live, so we'll see if the vibes are different. How's it going, Udi?
I'm going to make fun of your mustache the entire show.
That's actually pretty funny because I don't have a mustache. Okay, what's Taproot Wizards up to? We're at the Bitcoin conference. What are you guys up to?
I mean, we were making Bitcoin magical again, is what we're up to for the last year and a half. Right now, we're like super obsessed with Upcat and CATVM. That's the thing for us. I think we spent kind of the first, 6 to 12 months of our kind of story in working to remove cultural roadblocks in Bitcoin. And I think that worked pretty well, actually, better than we expected. And now I think it's time to remove some technical roadblocks too, some technical challenges in the way to help Bitcoin fulfill its magical potential.
Yeah. When did you? So I tend to agree that you guys have done quite a bit to change the culture in Bitcoin. And I think a lot of people have heard from you about that, like at this point, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to get into what you guys are doing now. So like when you talk about technical roadblocks and CATVM, what are we looking at?
Yeah, ever since I first kind of heard about Bitcoin around, let's say 2013, 2014, there were already discussions about the concept of sidechains back then. What people call sidechains today is very different from what they described as sidechains back then. Back then, it was supposed to be a permissionless way to transfer Bitcoin between the main chain to some other chain. Blockstream kind of coined that term sidechain, and after they realized that they wanted to soft fork Bitcoin with some new opcode in order to allow that to happen. And after a while, they realized that they probably don't have the political capital to do that. So they changed the definition of sidechain to mean a more trusted, federated way to bridge Bitcoin. So now people actually, whenever people say sidechain, they refer to something that's kind of trust-based, but the origins of the word were not that. And ever since I joined, this was the holy grail. Not only to scale Bitcoin, but also to add functionality to Bitcoin. It would make sense that the added functionality would not be on the base layer, but on some other layers that has its own, risks associated with it, but at least it's permissionless and you can use it with the new features that you would like. And that was always the idea of how Bitcoin would kind of grow. And 10 years later, I would say we didn't achieve it,
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, so let's go back a little bit because I think that from what I saw, the impetus for Taproot Wizards and you guys kind of reinvigorating the spirit of development on Bitcoin was largely fueled. Well, I don't want to put you necessarily in this category, but I will say that, and I talked to Eric, of course, before this, right? So a lot of what I got from Eric was, look at all the development elsewhere. Look where the developers are going. Look what's being built elsewhere. We can bring this to Bitcoin. There was reluctance, obviously, from Bitcoiners because, for all the reasons that you stated, we don't have to go back into, right? But I want to know then, what do you think has been wildly successful elsewhere that Bitcoin definitely needs?
Right. That's a great question. And potentially the answer is nothing, right? Because there's we probably are of a similar opinion that the vast majority of stuff in crypto are complete shit. I don't know that it's a specific thing or feature that we want to import. I think it's the spirit of experimentation. There isn't necessarily the specific thing. One use case that I think is pretty cool is being able to take your Bitcoin and maybe sell some of it into stable coins and then maybe get Bitcoin back later. I think that is a very simple, reasonable use case that you would want to do. Today, you can do that with Bitcoin with centralized exchanges, and it would have been pretty nice if you could do that without them. So that's an obvious one. I don't know that people are going to sit around doing that all day, but it's like a nice feature to have. But beyond that, that didn't exist either in crypto. The reason that it ended up happening was because people were experimenting with a ton of stuff.
Right.
And I think the experimentation is important. It's really hard for me to tell you how things are going to end up being used. But I think that there's been this artificial roadblock that just doesn't need to be there, that is stopping people from experimenting and finding out what the full potential of Bitcoin is.
Did you look at the rest of crypto? And like you said, you and I are probably largely in agreement with regards to like the practical use case for a lot of the stuff. But did you look at a lot of crypto and come to the conclusion yourself? Because this is something this is my interpretation, okay? I think you observed 10 years of what you consider to be stagnant growth in Bitcoin. You saw a tremendous amount of development. Now, like, we can sort of decide whether or not this is, sustainable or not. Yeah, exactly. But did you come to the conclusion in a sense that like the only way we are going to reinvigorate this spirit is through degeneracy? And I'm not necessarily saying that, I want to be clear just before you respond. I'm not necessarily saying that with regards to ordinals or you guys' collection or anything like that. I'm saying that more just like you're looking at all these coins that are printed out of thin air every single day, right? Mm-hmm. And you see all these people degenning with them. Did you think this is the only way that we bring people to Bitcoin? This is a little bit of my read of you. That's why I say this.
Yeah. So, I used to be known as this like massive Bitcoin maximalist, right? I vividly hated all of this stuff. And yeah, I think that at some point it is definitely not the only way to onboard Bitcoin into people into Bitcoin. And we were seeing that it's not, right? Obviously the ETF has been, I think, a big driver of something like that. I think that the fact that it's now a political issue on a national scale is going to be a driver of that too. There are many ways. I think it's the way that I can contribute, right? So like when I'm looking at this kind of scene, I'm like, okay, here's something that I understand and that I can work towards and I think is beneficial. I'm not going to be the guy who brings Kamala Harris to a debate, to a Bitcoin debate, so I'm not going to be trying to do that, So like this is the way I look at this stuff. I think I'm kind of looking into my journey into Bitcoin and like, look, I got into Bitcoin when I did because I wanted to make money off of it, right? Like this was, I saw it as an interesting investment. And more than that, I also like the fact that, I can quickly like buy and sell and I can like play some trades. I was terrible at it, by the way, but I like the degeneracy aspect of it. And I know for a fact that a ton of other people of that time did too. But we had something that I think a lot of new Bitcoiners don't have, which is that we could take a lot of risk with Bitcoin. Bitcoin was a very risky investment in 2013, an incredibly risky investment, and it was very edgy, and like it was unlikely to work out. I didn't think it was very likely to work out, but I could see a scenario where it works out. And when it does, there's of course many, many multiples involved. I don't know that Bitcoin offers that today. I think it's still bullish. I'm very bullish on Bitcoin. Are people going to get like a 5,000x on it though? Man, I don't see that. I think that's unlikely, So that's why you see those people going down the risk curve and looking for some insanely crazy speculative bullshit because they don't have that opportunity in Bitcoin anymore. I was lucky in that sense, but I was there at the right time.
Yeah, but, I think like the way that I see this is that a lot of Bitcoiners maybe, and you've certainly played a role in changing a lot of their minds, I think, but like a lot of Bitcoiners have seen a lot of this stuff and observed it, maybe even more neutrally than the 10% that are loud and laser on Twitter, right? Like there's a lot of Bitcoiners who have observed a lot of the rest of the crypto ecosystem and have concluded that this stuff isn't wildly useful, but there's a tremendous amount of development that goes into it, right? And there's a tremendous amount of funding that goes into it. But on the other hand, like I've heard you're patently honest. You said there's basically two use cases that you've seen that have really captured what appears to be sustainable product market fit, and those are stablecoins and NFTs. And I think that this is the like bridge oftentimes that a lot of us are trying to reconcile, right? Like we see Ponzi after Ponzi after Ponzi. And then we see, okay, even you are just admitting, and a lot of us deep down are admitting, okay, like what appears sustainable thus far? Stablecoins, NFTs, maybe like NFTs being more of like the cultural side, right? And then stablecoins. And then maybe.
And to be clear, stablecoins are way bigger than NFTs, right?
Right, exactly. So, so then how do you like kind of, I guess that was more of a diatribe than a question, but like, how do you reconcile this with the notion of like, just build everything, right? Like go and build all these Ponzi's and DeFi games and so on and so forth, when deep down we know like, like these are the things that seem useful, really, you know? Like, do you think it's justified then to sort of create a culture where it's like move fast, break things, people get, wrecked, they get wrecked?
Right. I do think it's justified. Okay. I mean, I think that people are responsible for their choices. And I think more than that, I have for many years tried to stop people from doing those things and failed miserably because you can't. By the way, a lot of times they ended up being right. They made more money than me on a bunch of things. Like they ended up being right. Like that's just the fact that something is a gamble doesn't mean that it's my place to tell people not to do it. Those two use cases of stablecoins and NFTs, they were born out of that kind of speculative frenzy.
Yeah, for sure.
They wouldn't have existed otherwise. So it takes like the DeGens. The reason that they're just an amazing kind of audience for any product that you would want to build, because they are eager to try everything as soon as possible. And they are brutally honest with how much they hate everything. And it's if you're a builder, that's incredibly useful. So it makes sense to start with that and hopefully within that thing, find something that works and take it into something that's kind of more established.
I think I would just note recently, and maybe this is just my own observation, but I would say that the Solana DeGens, like the pure meme coin DeGens, a lot of these people really like Bitcoin. And a lot of these people, I mean, like there's a lot of minutia about this whole barbell idea of, meme coins and Bitcoin, right? It's like everybody's trying to psychoanalyze like an absolute cesspool of a market.
Right.
But I've seen a lot of these Solana people who are like, I know this stuff's worthless. No one has ever, see, this is the difference, right? It's like no one thinks that WIF is going to become a currency or a store of value, right? It's always just like, maybe there's somebody I can ultimately sell this to. And a community is built around this and then get absurd market caps, right?
Right.
But a lot of these people ultimately do see, I think, the story in their value in Bitcoin. Like I've seen this a lot from the Solana people. I would say the middle of the curve generally is Ethereum people. Now, I'm not like trying to be so critical here, but I think they believe a lot more in the development of DeFi and financial infrastructure. And it hasn't really come into fruition yet. And I don't know, like, do you have, like, would you generally agree with this? Or like, what are your thoughts on?
I think that's super accurate. Yeah. Like I used to be way, way more critical of like altcoins back when, Ripple would spend, I don't know, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars on those marketing campaigns that Bitcoin sucks and Ripple is going to replace Bitcoin because it's faster.
Yeah.
And at that time, and like it was, look, anyone with half a brain would realize that it's bullshit. But that was the narrative, and the Ripple crowd believed that, and a lot of like newcomers to Bitcoin believed that. I think today it's completely different. I think today it's a lot more honest in that sense. NFTs are just pictures of things. If you think that a picture is going to, make you financially free, I mean, I don't know, go ahead and figure out if you're right, fine. But it's no one's lying that this picture is going to give you access to flying Uber cars or something.
Yeah.
Right? Same with the meme coins, they're very honest about what they are.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for me to find a problem, like a moral problem with that.
I would say one thing with regards to NFTs. I think there are, and I mean, this, there are extremely wealthy people who will buy an NFT, and it does not matter what they are offered for that NFT. And so there is, I'm being somewhat generous here, but there is a community that develops around that. CryptoPunks, absolutely. There is a real community of OG Ethereum people, or I mean just crypto people in general, that is developed around that. Meme coins, conversely, the community, I would say, is generally, there are community members who will hold longer than other community members, but in the end, you do want to exit, right?
Yeah.
So I think that would be the only difference, but I would agree, like at least on the base level, that both of these are fairly transparent, right? Okay, and now I want to ask you, DeFi. Does anything interest you with this?
You know, I think it's easy to get confused between like the narrative and like the practicality of things.
Yes.
The DeFi narrative of we're gonna replace the traditional finance world with decentralized one, I don't see how anyone could buy that. I think that's absurd. That said, some of the things that they built ended up being extremely useful. The basic concept of an AMM or a liquidity pool is the thing that allowed this meme coin casino to exist. Now, sure, maybe you don't like casinos, that's fine. But it ended up being a useful primitive for casinos, for online digital casinos.
Is it useful for more than that though? Because side note, like a lot of people I bring on, I like talk about trading in AMMs and MAV and stuff, right? And like I have come to the conclusion that AMMs are exclusively useful probably for launching long tail assets, right?
Yep.
And beyond this, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good point. I think most people don't realize that. I think that is what it's for. It used to be positioned as a way to do a decentralized exchange. I think that's how it got invented, maybe, but that's not what it ended up being.
Right.
It is an automated market maker. Markets need market makers. Teeny tiny long tail coins are unlikely to be able to procure a market maker in the early, launch
permissionless
period.
Capital formation.
So making it kind of, part of the launching process and having some guarantees as to the safety of the funds that are allocated to it are worthwhile to that early that's what pumped the fund ended up being.
For sure.
So yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think it's very useful for that launching phase of absolute crappy shit coins. But that is important because that helps them transition from being absolute crappy shit coins into being at least something that is liquid,
Yeah.
And I, in the kind of Bitcoin ecosystem, the Bitcoin Season 2 ecosystem, I love criticizing runes for the lack of that.
Yeah.
I think that a ton of people in Bitcoin, in the kind of ordinals and runes field, just don't get it.
Yeah.
I think runes, because they don't have liquidity pools, that means that those tokens do not have a path to liquidity, which means that they're dead.
Yeah. Well, I will give you credit. Like maybe a week before runes launched, you wrote this thing about how, guys, this is probably not going to be wildly successful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of screwy things with runes. I mean, even just like being able to break them
someone
down.
Might still fix. Someone might come up with a successful LP thing for runes. It would not be particularly permissionless, but still, someone might do it in a centralized way or trusted way or something. If it catches on, that might fix the problem.
Yeah.
But currently, yeah.
Okay, so then CATVM. What do you want to see? Well, first of all, maybe you can just people have probably hopefully read the
children's book, the CATVM comic book.
Hopefully, some people have read this, but maybe briefly, what is CATVM, and then what are you hoping to do with CATVM?
Yep. So if you didn't read it, you can go to catvm.org and you'll get this beautiful PDF file. I think it's the only white paper that's presented as a children's book. So what we wanted to do there is make it very easy for people to read it. Most white paper optimized for being unreadable so that they seem smart. And we wanted just to optimize for people actually going through it. It's I like to describe it as a framework for building OpCat-based apps. Some people might choose to describe it as an L2. I don't like that term, so I don't use it. But it basically, OpCat as its own, it does allow for a lot of expressivity, but the way it does it is very hacky and ugly. You have to chain hundreds of OpCat actions literally in a script and figure out how to do it in a smart way that does what you want. That is not something that I expect anyone to do. CATVM kind of creates the environment that you would need in order to use, a regular programming language in order to build what you want to build. So that's essentially what it is. And I think the really cool thing about it is people could probably build anything with it. It's very expressive, so you could build whatever you want. We are going to optimize on that DeGen use case, on making ordinals better, making runes better, because that's a community that we know that is eager to, go ahead and play around with those things. I think once we achieve success there, I do think it will eventually be used for things like, payments, privacy, so on, because it can. There's nothing that stops you, but you first need to kind of put it on the map, and that's what the kind of DeGen community is really good at.
What is your, I don't know if you, I'm sure Reindl and Tyler are hacking away. So, and I know you and Eric are the pump guys.
Correct.
So I understand the performance art side and the people who understand computer side.
I'm not on that side. Yeah.
Yeah. No. You're honest about this. What is so my point was saying with that was, I don't know how much you can sort of disclose right now, but what is your vision for what this bridge or this kind of implementation looks like as of now? And then maybe if you want to talk about, should we get OPCAT then? Yeah.
So for you, our focus is for users to make this as native to Bitcoin as possible. I think, look, I'm extremely kind of satisfied and happy to see that there's so many, projects now that are building Bitcoin L2s, because I think that is the way to go. I think we need a ton of people experimenting. That said, most of it is junk. I'm sure you would agree. I think that there's this path dependency thing where most people in the Bitcoin development community were hyper focused on Lightning and not anything else.
Yeah.
So kind of by definition, anyone who tries anything else has to come from other ecosystem, and that's what happened. So if you look at that kind of landscape right now, you would see mostly kind of forks of Ethereum rollups and stuff like that I don't know personally if it makes sense. I'm glad they're doing it, but I think we're maybe over-indexing on that direction. But that's fine, it'll figure itself out. What we're focusing on is making stuff that is completely Bitcoin native. It's definitely not going to be EVM. It's going to be, incredibly similar to what it is to interact with Bitcoin today, just faster and more capable. For users, we're really focused on eliminating the kind of bridging steps that you're used to on other chains. The experience is supposed to be you have Bitcoin in your wallet. The wallet manages where the Bitcoin goes and how, and you don't think about that. You just go and, you want to buy an ordinal, we will find you the best way to buy it, if it's using CATVM or not, and so on. So that is the kind of the way that it's going to feel for the user. The idea is you don't feel it, you don't know that it's there, but you just end up getting what you want faster and easier. And sometimes, look, in the case of runes, right, I think it could completely transform the runes ecosystem, because right now it's completely incapable.
Yeah.
And once it fixes that thing, then it could, who knows, but maybe runes become a bigger, more popular thing. So that's kind of what I would expect as a user. But also we're working with as many Bitcoin projects as we possibly can to see how it can be useful for them in what they're doing. So, sure, a lot of time would be marketplaces for stuff like ordinals and runes, but also, not gonna get to any specifics, but I do think it improves the payment use case too. It improves other things too. So,
Yeah, there's kind of this interesting, I've gleaned this from Bitcoiners for a while now, which is sort of this idea, you need to prove product market fit, right? And this is this is a very dicey statement here, because it's we want you to prove product market fit, but in reality, whatever implementation is either currently available, it is currently available. It's hard to say that would be product market fit because it's not the real implementation. How do you feel about looking at some of these L2s, right? A lot of them, they're certainly not as mature as a lot of the Ethereum L2s. Once again, we're being generous with the terminology here. But how do you feel about these L2's proving product market fit? Like I'm using a random name here, right? Like this, just saying this, Botanics gets a tremendous amount of liquidity, right? And they have some, I don't know, like incentive program. Once again, I have no idea if they are. I'm just using this as an example, right? Do we look at this and say, product market fit here? And the reason I'm asking this is because recently you and Eric were trolling each other on Twitter, and you were talking about how he was all AI doomer, and you were like, you predicted the Ethereum roadmap the roll-up centric roadmap would take off, and now what we've seen is a fragmentation of a bunch of Ponzi's. Just go ahead.
So actually, you mentioned Botanics. Actually, I think Botanics specifically doesn't do that.
I know they have I know they're just going to take sequencer fees, which I don't. Yeah, I think is not a bad idea. But
yeah. So because I want to preface this with saying they're not doing that, and then I'll say
I should have used the X,
no, but it's fine. That's actually good that you picked that because now I can sound like all positive.
Yeah.
I do think that practice that they're not doing is not probably a great practice. But I also understand why people are doing it. I think that when Blast did that on Ethereum, I think it was a smart move actually for Blast and for the Ethereum ecosystem even, because what they did is everyone was doing it before them too, but they just made it like very honest and obvious. They're like, you know what, this isn't like a professor chain. This is a casino. And we want you to put your coins here and we'll give you points. Whereas the other ones were like, maybe there'll be an airdrop and we want to incentivize activity. And they're like, guys, put your coins in this address and you'll get points.
That's 3 of 5 multi-sig, no less.
Yeah. But, I think they were much more honest about it. And I think by doing that, they, one, made themselves very successful. And two, they killed the meta. Which is beneficial for the space. Now that meta is, people like to criticize Blast now and say, they fucked up and the market cap or whatever is lower than what people expected. But that's only because the expectations were insane because of that marketing trick that they did. If they didn't do that, then Blast would have been nothing. So for Blast, it was very successful. And it was also successful for the ecosystem because now that meta is finally dead. It's a stupid meta. And I do think that the airdrop meta at large is probably over.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
What do you think of the Ethereum roll-up centric roadmap?
I think, it's funny. Is it even really a roadmap? So I think what I like about Ethereum, there's other things I don't like, but what I do like is that they did genuinely experiment with a ton of things. There are so many they tried the payment channel approach like Lightning for a little while.
Alex trying to bring that back.
With Plasma. So they tried that. They tried the roll-up stuff. There were a bunch of other ideas. There's the optimistic stuff versus the ZK stuff. I think that is positive. It ends up with, depending, obviously there was the Casper thing, right? And was it Casper? Or Casper was a proof of stake thing?
Yeah, that's the proof of stake.
Yeah. So something else was sharding.
The
sharding thing. They had all of these ideas and many of them, don't really come to fruition. But I do think that approach at least progressed somewhat. And, maybe at least now we know that rollups are not that great. That's good too. Because with the way I only have the kind of Lightning thing to compare it to. And I think that process has been terrible. I think it was incredibly bad for the Bitcoin ecosystem. Not only did we not end up with anything useful, I would almost, that's going to be a controversial thing to say, but I would almost say that it ruined a few people's lives because a lot of people focused the best years of their career on this stuff because a bunch of podcasters and influencers who know nothing about tech told them that this is obviously not only going to change Bitcoin, but the world. And it's the best thing that you could possibly do with your time. And we had, hundreds to thousands of people working on Lightning solutions for the last 10 years, which is absurd because it never got anywhere. why would you have so many people working on something that doesn't? So I actually think I see that today. There's a bunch of people who dedicated the best years of their lives to this thing. And now that they're realizing that it's probably not going to be a thing, they don't know what to do with themselves anymore, which is unfortunate. I think there's been this dogma, about like Lightning as the obvious. And I know why this happened, by the way. I think I know. It was very political. So in 2017, there was this whole block size war thing. And the guys on the small block camp, I was part of that camp too, eventually. The guys on the small block camp saw Lightning as an excuse that they can use for how Bitcoin will end up scaling.
Yeah.
So they turned this into a political tool and into the obvious way that Bitcoin is going to scale. But they didn't care. They just wanted to shut down the other camp.
Yeah.
So it ended up being like a cultural thing that you have to believe that Lightning is going to be that thing. And I really think it did kind of ruin a few people's lives.
Yeah, it's funny. Alex B was talking to me. He's like, actually, ironically, the people who were looking into Lightning and understood that it was going to, probably devolve and, well, I said devolve, but it would probably end up being, more of like a hub and spoke model as opposed to, this like Tor like network of routing nodes, right? Like ironically, we're the Bitcoin Cash people because they were actually willing to dig in and see this. Now, I will say though, the thing about Lightning, right? Like I 100% agree generally with your views, right? And it has not lived up to what it was claimed to be. Prior to this though, you can go and see Greg Maxwell talking about sidechains way back, right? Yep. And so there was some agreement though that this way to scale Bitcoin block space was not necessarily with more block space.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. I also think that the way is not by adding more block space. That I fully agree with. But I think we tricked ourselves. We used this as like a narrative in order to win the war, and we forgot to. After we won the war, we forgot to move on. And what I like about the Ethereum ecosystem is that they never seem to have pushed themselves so deep into a corner like this. They certainly
pivoted from sharding.
Yeah, they've pivoted from sharding. They've pivoted from plasma. Maybe they'll pivot back. The point is that they've kept an open mind.
Yeah.
And I think that is important because if you don't, then you just commit to a solution. I mean, it's almost guaranteed that the first solution you come up with will not be the best. Like how would you possibly design the best solution ahead of time? It's very unlikely. I think that was, I was very supportive of the small block camp, and I'm still technically supportive of smaller blocks. But I think that having grown up a bit, I thinking back on that, I think that the big block camp had a lot of good points about the kind of central planning way that people do things in Bitcoin. It was, very heated at the time, and everything seemed like a personal attack. But so it was very hard to like not listen. It was very easy to not listen. But I think they made a lot of good points. I think maybe what this really was about was this kind of more move fast camp against the more central planning camp.
Right.
And I'm not sure that it's that good that the central planning camp won,
Yeah. So, but then, okay, so on this note, we understand the limitations of Lightning, and now we're seeing the limitations of rollups. And I've talked to people now, and I think there's there's probably some sentiment within the Ethereum community. Okay, like let's scale the L1. I mean, the last interview I did with this kid, Max Resnick, is very deep in the weeds on this stuff, and he's like, we got to bring this back to the L1. They see what Solana can do, right? Like, so maybe not rollups. Maybe Lightning obviously has its limitations. What's our solution? CATVM. What is our solution then?
Yeah, so actually with CATVM, I don't know that CATVM is the solution at all. I don't think it is for scaling. So we are not looking at CATVM as a scaling solution at all. We're looking at it as a solution that adds functionality. That's what's so different between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Bitcoin doesn't have a rich L1. So that is the problem we're trying to fix. And honestly, that's a much easier problem to fix. So we're very lucky that we get to have that problem to fix. The scaling problem is much more difficult. We're not optimizing CATVM to be the best scaling solution. It will be better than using L1, but I'm not here to tell you it's the best scaling solution will live forever. Very likely it wouldn't be. So there wouldn't need to be a bunch of like, developments in the future.
Yeah.
But for now, I just don't think it's the right approach to look for the most scalable way to do things, because first we need to prove that people even want to do this at all.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think you're being like pretty precise with your words and saying I don't think it's a scaling solution. Like I think you know what you're doing. I think it's I think it's no because it is interesting, right? Because like I do see on Ethereum with these rollups, right? They're putting these forth as scaling solutions, and you can talk about whether or not they're parasitic. That is a slightly different argument to me, right? Because like there's a lot of it's parasitic to the L1, and they're ultimately going to launch storage. Like maybe, but more importantly, I think is like when you scale block space with more block space, right? Like for whatever reason, I think there has. I mean, this is my opinion. This is what I've observed, and I think there's been like some sort of indoctrination with this idea that ZK is like inherently scaling. It does allow more throughput of transactions on an L2, but I think in order to run, so this is the equivalent I use. Lightning, if you want to act trustlessly with Lightning, you have to run a node, right? But what you're doing is storing local state, peer-to-peer state.
Yep.
If you want to have the same level of trustlessness with these Ethereum L2s, you have to run a node. You probably have to maybe run a sequencer in order to I was like talking to Shazan about this the other day. He'd be better in the technical weeds about this. But so I think you guys have brought up a really great point, which I 100% agree with. Rindale said the same thing. People should be able to self-custody receive Bitcoin on an L2, or maybe we don't have to call them L2s, be able to, in a cheap way, receive Bitcoin without having to open a channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not have that like inbound liquidity problem, or whatever we have with Lightning now. Beyond this, what do you want to see in terms, like, so you're talking about like the ordinals and rune stuff right now, like hopefully, it'll allow people to do it in an easier way. Mm-hmm. What type of, like, let's be serious for a second, because I know like mainly a lot of this is like a little bit of a troll, right? But let's be serious. Like, what do you see? Like, for example, I think borrowing against your Bitcoin for stable coins is like an obvious use case. That to me is like something that a lot of Bitcoiners want. They don't want to use Unchained. They got blown up last year or last cycle, right? What else do you see? Like, what would you really like?
Look, that is one very obvious use case. Sometimes people just want to sell. So trading, is the other Bitcoin to stable coins and the other way around. Another good use case. I think, knowing the ordinals ecosystem, I can tell you a billion things that we can improve there once we have more like expressivity. So that's the other thing. For me, that's enough. I don't need more than that right now. That will, I think, fundamentally change the way that people use Bitcoin. So that's, let's do that first. Yeah. And then, but the really great thing is, I'm not some genius. I'm not going to come up.
I don't think any of us are.
Right? I'm not going to come up with on a podcast with what are the cool use cases. If we're lucky, maybe we'll stumble upon something ourselves. And if we're not, then hopefully someone else will stumble upon a great use case. But that will be enabled by CATVM and OpCat, just more in general. Right now, you just cannot stumble upon those things.
Right.
An example I like giving is, so if you look at what we call Bitcoin Season 2 so far, there's probably 3 main protocols that did really well. It's ordinals first, then BRC20s, and then runes. Now, they all had these kind of hype cycles, right? And if you're a miner, for example, then you could look and say, well, it's pretty good for me that there's these times that the fees are very high. That's great for miners. But then it's not great that they go back down, right?
For sure.
And I think by the nature of it, fees are not going to be sustainably high because they're high when there's urgency, when users are trying to get into a block very urgently. And that is, by definition, a temporary thing. However, it became urgent when those protocols had their, like, at least local peaks.
Right.
And that happened with the limited capability of what you can do with Bitcoin today. I think that once OpCat is a thing, then you, instead of having 3 successful protocols in a year, you will have 3 successful protocols in a week or a month, right? You're going to have a ton of people experimenting with a ton of crazy protocols, a ton of Ponzi's too. Mostly Ponzi's, and they most of them will not even gain any traction at all, but some of them will. And because we're suddenly opening up, the design space, then it's not something that happens once a quarter. It's something that happens every week. And from the miner perspective, that's fantastic. It's still like peaks and they're temporary, but the peaks are suddenly much more frequent. So for the miners, they're like, oh, this is a nice thing. The chain becomes a bit more healthy. So that is, how I would describe that. Now, out of all of those like Ponzi's that people are going to build, hopefully once a year, we end up with something that is actually, valuable.
Yeah.
By accident. By no doubt, the person who built it because they want to build a Ponzi. But maybe by accident, it ends up being useful, which is what happened with AMMs and a bunch of other primitives.
I recall, I think Rindell and Tyler wrote a pretty, I don't want to say critical, but they broke down BITVM. What are your thoughts on first of all, is BITVM and CATVM in competition? That's not the right way to say it, but are they similar enough to be comparable? And then also, what are your general thoughts on BITVM and the evolution of the past, from BITVM V1 to where we are now?
It's a little tough because BITVM is very loosely defined.
Yeah.
It's not a secret that the author of BITVM is not the biggest fan of Taproot Wizards.
Yeah, I've seen.
He's made that known multiple times.
Thrown out of multiple Telegram chats.
Yeah. And that's okay. I'm used to people not being a fan of me, so that's fine. But what we've found is that when we try to communicate about BITVM, we're always told that, oh, the thing you're describing is not BITVM. So we're like, okay, so can you tell us what it is? And it's like, oh no, we're still authoring the paper. We just launched BITVM 2, but we can't tell you what it is yet, which is fine. I think that's the way that things go. Obviously, you're not going to define everything on day one, but it's kind of hard to reason about it because of that. I think if I understand it correctly, I think that the goal of BITVM is to enable more expressivity without a soft fork. That is the goal,
correct.
To do that without a soft fork.
Yeah.
And I think that is a commendable goal. I don't know that it achieves that. It certainly hasn't so far, right? But I would love if it does. I think that once you accept, though, that a soft fork exists, by definition, you do not need BITVM anymore. BITVM is actually a collection of hacks that exist in order to get around the fact that there isn't a soft fork. And we just fundamentally believe that a soft fork is not that difficult to achieve. That's like a fundamental belief that we have in the company. I think that the market is wrong. The famous market is wrong. Everyone assumed that making a soft fork is near impossible. And I think they're just doing it wrong. And that's why we're not able to do it. So for that fundamental reason, we think that BITVM is not going to be necessary. It's just a collection of hacks that will not end up being used.
Yeah,
because we will have the soft fork. That said, I think it's fantastic if it does work somehow, and that ends up being the way that people get more functionality in Bitcoin. That's fantastic. I have nothing against that.
What do you think about some of these projects raising money or promoting the notion that they will use BITVM when, one, it's not really clear there's a real BITVM right now.
Yeah.
Two, from our understandings, it's extremely impractical even if we got to the point where BITVM is, in production. How do you feel about teams, maybe this is just a broader question that you can roll with, but how do you feel about teams now raising on some expectation of XYZ or somebody hacking together a bridge for them and kind of running with that when we don't know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's maybe 2 questions in this. One is, do I think it's a good investment? And the answer is usually no. In most of those things, I chose not to invest in. So I believe that it's not the optimal path. However, is it wrong that it's happening? No, I don't think so. I think that now that I'm in that side, we raised our seed round last year, and now that I'm on that side of raising funds and I understand the game better. I can see why they do that. I can see why investors feel like they need to hear that. I can see why those things happen. And I also think in general that it is completely fine to present a general, very unclear vision of how things are going to play out, getting the money and then figuring it out in a way that might have very little to do with the original pitch.
Yeah.
I think that's fine if it's done. It's very hard to know if this is done from the right intentions because look, if you're going to raise funds, you should, have some vision that you believe in, but also you are not expected to figure out the details, and you shouldn't be. You're raising the funds in order to figure out the details. I actually think that has been one of the kind of illnesses of the Bitcoin development community. They, over the years, insisted on having this fully fleshed out white paper and protocol specs before even going out into the world and seeing if anyone even wants this. I think that's not the way to go about things. I think it is totally reasonable to raise funds and start acquiring users even before you have answers to all the questions. I think it is the right way to do those things.
I think I recall you saying that, well, I joke about this too, but probably less seriously. I think you're serious when you say it. You're like, if a project is wondering whether or not they need a token. You have been, I think, pretty optimistic about tokens. Do you still feel this way? And how do you feel this way with regards to Bitcoin L2s maybe?
Yeah. First of all, we are not thinking about a token. I don't know if one day it will make sense. I'm not saying it won't, it might, but right now this is not at all something we're thinking about. But I can see how it would make sense. I think that, look, that statement that I made was, very time sensitive.
Yeah,
I think
I'm not holding
no,
you to anything.
No, I'm saying I think I stand behind it. I think it was true at the time that I said it. I also think that today it might be different. I think that today the market feels flooded with tokens.
Oh yeah.
And liquidity is pretty low compared to the past for those other coins. So I'm not sure that I would recommend for someone to do that right now. But I think in the past it was an obvious yes, and now it really depends. For the other L2s, it's hard for me to tell them what to do.
Right, of course. But what should tokens represent in that case? Like in your vision of a token, it's equity or governance rights. And we've seen how this plays out. And I think this is, I would put myself, I'll just say.
I'm more of a fan of the meme side of things.
Yeah, but why even have a project behind it then, right? Like I agree. Like, don't get me wrong. I agree, right? Like Bitcoin's the greatest meme coin. I think we all agree on this, right?
Yeah.
But why even have any semblance of value or utility or whatever?
So, okay, why does ETH have value?
They would say because of I started by saying they would say.
What they say is bullshit. Why does it have value?
Because it is a platform for gambling degenerately.
But why does the token ETH have value? Because you could have, said whatever, use stable coins as gas, or use why does ETH?
Well, I agree with that. But
okay, so I don't agree with that. I think I used to, but I think that Ethereum would never have gotten to where it is today.
Oh, okay, then yeah. I also agree with you then.
And ETH is much closer to being a meme coin than a lot of the L2 coins. I think Vitalik is a incredibly masterful community builder. I think that is the number one thing that he is. I think maybe a lot of people think of him as a developer or researcher or whatever. I think of him as a masterful community builder. I think the best that crypto has ever seen. Satoshi was
Luke
not
Dash Jr.
okay. The second best.
Sorg.
Satoshi was not bad, but Satoshi was good at the early stage and lift. Vitalik was very good at the early stage, but then also later. I think that without him, and I know a lot of Bitcoiners would say that as a bad thing. Without him, Ethereum would not be here. I think it's a very good thing that he made it happen. I think he built a community that sees Ethereum as a mission.
Yeah, I agree.
That is, in my opinion, not really true about Solana yet. It's close.
What do you say that?
Maybe because Solana's mission is kind of more generic. It's like, this needs to be faster. It needs to scale to 1 billion people, and it's a good mission, but it's hard to. It's not a good meme. I don't think it is a very good meme. It's like an optimizing thing. And Vitalik, especially in the early, it's easy to take Ethereum for granted now, but especially in the early years when this was just a vision, he really inspired this community to think about how the internet would change and how finance would change. Now, I don't think finance changed in the way that they believed, right, but it did change in the sense that crypto is now a real financial asset. Meme coins are a real thing that attract a lot of capital. A lot of this stuff would not happen otherwise. It did affect financial markets to a degree. I would not in the way they thought.
I would counter. I don't know if it's a counter, but with regards to Solana, I would just say Solana wouldn't like me to say this, but I don't know that Solana ends up exceptionally decentralized. I don't think it's feasible when you're trying to go as fast as they are. I don't think it's possible. But what I do think is they're optimizing for what they saw 6 years of users on Ethereum wanting, which is they have
an advantage, a huge advantage.
Right,
I just don't know that as a community. I'm incredibly bullish on the Solana community. I just mean that is that kind of mission-driven thing. I don't know that they have that.
Yeah, but what valuable... I'm gonna really put myself in a I don't know, laser eye category here or something, but what values have derived from ETH that outside of this group of sort of ideologues has transcended into the real world? I mean, I guess what I'm saying,
I'm with you.
DAOs, quadratic voting, these are idealist, right? And I believe Vitalik genuinely believes in the vision that he promotes. I have never thought that Vitalik was a scammer. I think that Bitcoiners, they look at Vitalik and they say, Ethereum is controlled by Vitalik, and it actually is extremely detrimental to what they should be saying, which is that these high ideals have permeated the culture, and a lot of these don't actually reconcile well with what the users end up wanting to do. And we've now seen this sort of alignment and realignment and all this stuff in Ethereum, right? And I look at Solana, I'm just saying they saw, a lot of these kind of visions, but what they saw were people wanting to degen and get, max leverage and farm a bunch of shitcoins. And they said, hey, we can do this on a single monolithic chain that goes really fast and the fees are cheap. And that's
I think maybe I wasn't clear with what I was trying to say. I'm more bullish on Solana than on Ethereum, easily. However, I think that the value of ETH would have been zero if not for the community that was built around it.
Yeah.
And I think that does need to be studied because it is the second biggest, crypto asset in the world. Just got an ETF recently that people thought would never happen.
Solana will get an ETF too.
Probably, yeah.
Maybe even Avalanche.
I mean, yeah. But my point is, I think that ETH is seen today as, this kind of crypto asset is unlikely to go to zero.
True.
And I think that happened because it was memed into being that. It didn't happen because of the tech. It didn't happen because of the roadmap. I think it happened because the community memed it into this thing. And I think that most of the roll-ups, Optimism, Arbitrum are very bad at it. And it's it's easy to see that, right? Like the way that people think about, the Optimism coin and the Arbitrum coin is not anything like what they feel about Ethereum.
Yeah, so maybe actually that's
that's
a good
why
point.
I'm like saying I do believe in the meme. Like if you're asking what are those tokens going to be, I think that if you want to build tech and infrastructure, that's great. But the token, if you think that's going to have a token, you need to focus on the community building and the memes, not on, the governance, like messaging board. Like,
what do you think about Eric? Do you ever troll Eric about being an Arbitrum?
I troll him about so many things. The Arbitrum thing never even enters the. There's so many bigger things to troll him about.
AI killed all of us by today.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, you brought up a good point though, which is like I generally view if you're going to launch an L1, you need a token. Just because that's how these things work. You need a token for an L1. What I'm wondering more is with.
So that's where the disagreement is. I don't think so. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there doesn't need to be a difference between why there needs to be a coin for L1 and why there needs to be a coin for L2. I think it's similar. I think Solana, Tolly says that a lot of times. If Solana wasn't being pitched as a competitor to Ethereum, then people would have said that it's an Ethereum L2. Why not? Everything is.
Right.
So like I don't actually agree with that. I think that it needs to have a coin if you can build a community with a mission around it.
I'm saying more just like how they design these blockchains with their security
but that's an
model.
Excuse.
No, it is an excuse.
Yeah.
But maybe I should finish. Like my point was, an L1 security, whatever. Maybe it's all like an aberration of like maybe it's not real. But compare that to projects building atop Ethereum. That's when it becomes very memey. To me, like I do think there is a distinction in my mind, right? Like ETH is, like you were the one to say this. Like ETH is probably closer, at least at one point, was closer to the money of the internet than Bitcoin was. Everybody's using it to degen. Yep. People were using ETH. I was using ETH. You were using ETH. It's very patently obvious, right? We couldn't even get Bitcoin to become the currency that all of us were using, right?
Yep.
So I mean, I think this is a fantastic point, but I think you can distinguish this from some of these like DAO tokens and these L2 tokens, and then that's when I'm like, does this really need a token? Because most of what they pitch as the rationale for needing a token, I don't think has ever really come into fruition, like this idea of decentralizing to the community or decentralizing over time. If you have a plutocracy, if you have a way for a VC to own 30% of the supply, it doesn't matter if everybody in the world has a token. If the VC can push some governance change through, who cares, right? It's who owns the most coins. So that's where I'm kind of curious. Like when you think of applications, I mean, I guess, maybe the L1 of Ethereum views Optimism as an application technically, but I'm just curious, like.
So the way I look at it, Vitalik started this meme about, we're doing this thing and we're going to optimize for maximum decentralization. You could argue about whether he did that successfully or not, but that was the meme. And I think then a bunch of other people showed up and they didn't realize that it was a meme. They copied it thinking it was serious. You were supposed to come up with your own meme. Yeah. You can't take someone else's meme and say, "Oh, we're also going to be decentralized." What like?
Yeah, we'll do finance decentralized.
You're supposed to come up with your own thing.
Yeah,
and I think they didn't understand. A lot of times in crypto, that is one of the most amazing things that I don't think is as common outside of crypto. It happens, but in crypto, there's so many people who don't know why they won. There's a lot of winners, but they don't understand why they won. They have no idea. They think they know because someone told them some story, some meme about decentralization or something else, and they think that that's why they won, but it's not. You won because you found the right meme and you followed it at the right time. Well, essentially, yes. But like what happened behind the scenes is there was this one meme that was a good meme for its time, and you tagged along and you thought that you were, I don't know what you thought you were doing, but really you followed the meme that won. And today, and that's why I think so many people in Ethereum are so upset, and that's why so many people in Bitcoin were so upset when Ethereum got more popular, because they don't understand. They think that they won because, the nodes need to be decentralized. And it's like, no, bro, this is not
right.
This is not why you made money.
Yeah.
And they're upset because they don't get that. They don't get that the meme needs to be timely too. So and that's why everyone's so upset at the dog with hat people, like you
and the
just,
dog with hat people will be upset at the next people because they think that the dog with hat's so funny and they
think it's about the dog,
right? Exactly,
it's not about the dog.
The dog is decentral. Yeah, and it's interesting too because Vitalik has said many times, like, I mean, I think he's spot on about this. He says, like, the best form of governance is one that does not need a token. Right, like you don't need it. Like that's the most decentralized.
Even talking about governance,
I know. Well, I think it's
like,
a charade
why are we
as
even
well.
Talking about it,
I think it's a charade as well. But the irony is that like 99% of the most popular projects on Ethereum ended up with a token, right? And it's like, well, so you went from we don't need these tokens to now we do. And like I always point, I know you like maybe this isn't a great example, but I always point at Lightning and I say that's a protocol, and the token is Bitcoin, right? Now. There was a lot of malinvestment maybe in Lightning as well, but like there is a difference between like a protocol.
Malinvestment just doesn't work, like people are not using it. That is a problem with the system.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic. Let's let me just ask you some, I don't know, let's just dream for a second. Like, where do you see us in 5 years? Have you convinced Bitcoiners to use CATVM, and everyone is being very expressive with what they do with their Bitcoin? Where are we headed?
I think where we're headed is an explosion of experimentation on Bitcoin. We think that CATVM is the best way to get there and the most likely way to succeed, but I can't promise you that that's the way it's going to play out. But what I am convinced of, and the reason what we're kind of all in on this, is because I am sure that the experimenters are going to win against the ossifiers. I have no doubt. I'm seeing like the directionality of this, and I have no doubt that Bitcoin is going there. There's going to be a lot of crap that's going to get built, but I'm just a strong believer that when people experiment, they eventually find something that is useful. I'm just a really
if
big
we
believer
keep
of that.
building stuff, we'll find a use case.
Yeah, but that's every use case we found it that way. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would. Okay.
And Polymarket recently is a thing, and I don't know if you have opinions on that, but like Polymarket is a thing that at the very least is shown a use case in mainstream media can look at this and say that the odds here are higher than that. Now, there's no, as with everything else, there's no like technical reason why you need like a blockchain for this. It's like a regulatory arbitrage thing entirely. Sure. But that's fine, and that's a good use case. And maybe, the future of Polymarket is that they manage to close the regulatory arbitrage and move away from a blockchain. Awesome. I mean, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think this is like a vampire attack on a lot of the archaic. But
everything was. Stablecoins are that too.
Exact same. Yeah.
And at the time, Silk Road was a use case of Bitcoin.
For sure.
Eventually, by the way, they found ways to not have to use crypto necessarily for dark markets. And a lot of dark markets today don't use crypto that much, or at least have other options. But that's just the way those things work. I don't know that we would even have like the most basic way that I think about Bitcoin is that it's almost an insurance policy. It's this competitor that always exists to the financial system. I don't think that people will ever go to the store and use Bitcoin to buy, groceries. I don't think that's likely. It could, but I don't think that's super likely. But I think it's incredibly useful that we have Bitcoin so that the governments of the world and central banks look at it and say, well, if we fuck up too much, then people have a choice.
For sure.
And so, and equally the same thing, regulators will hopefully think, hey, if we fuck up too much with not letting people gamble on who's going to be president, then they're going to do it without us. Right. So we might as well change the regulatory framework. Yeah. I think that's a fantastic use case for crypto.
Yeah. I guess the one last thing I would just say is that, maybe it was a lot of I have difficulty reconciling a lot of this because I look at some of these proposed use cases and people say like, this is a viable use case. And what I see really is just, it's a further extension of the Ponzi. So it's hard for us to look even, and I'm going to go like extra critical here, like just for effect. I look at something like Uniswap and I say, okay, Uniswap has now appeared sustainable, however you want to define that, but it has appeared sustainable for 5 years now, right? Like it has a decent bit of volume, but in reality, like this is like selling the picks and shovels. This is like your one-stop shop to go and degen. So it's like if I don't know that this is transferable to the outside world, and I think you agree with this, but I try to curb my expectations because I'm like, I don't even know that we know what product market fit looks like yet because we've never operated in an efficient market. Right. And I had this conversation with Rob Hamilton too. It's like, we've never really seen like an efficient capital market with crypto because it's all print a new token, print a new token, print a new token. And you can extend this Ponzi for a long time. So I don't know. It's like the viable use cases is not like immediately clear to me yet. But
stable coins have not.
You're right. But like, this is the irony, right? Like stable coins, NFTs, and then maybe Bitcoin as a, self-sovereign store of value. Like that's what we found so far.
It's not that bad,
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. But there's some irony in how much is getting built, right?
But stable coins would never reach that, velocity if not for all of the Ponzi's. Now it ended up being a useful tool.
I agree.
But without the Ponzi's, it would never have happened.
Yeah. Udi, thank you so much. I think I would just like to say one other thing. I have respected you guys drive me nuts sometimes. I think you drive everybody nuts sometimes. I think you overdo it sometimes. Sometimes I think sometimes I don't think it's very funny. Sometimes you're actually pretty funny. So
I'm not trying to make people laugh, right?
But I will say, like, I always respect like you and Eric. I mean, you say some stuff that I don't really agree with, but then like Eric and you are very honest in saying like, yeah, we don't know if the roll-up centric roadmap works actually, and I think that like this is the one thing that keeps me still liking you guys, is that you're willing to be like, yeah, I'm actually not sure about that. And there's a lot of people who will like just double down and triple down.
It's going to change
exactly. The world. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was awesome.
Thanks, man.